The Book of Leviticus is one of the most fascinating, yet puzzling, books of the Bible. Nestled in the Old Testament, it contains a long list of laws that the ancient Israelites were instructed to follow. 1. Kosher Dietary Laws, Leviticus 11. One of the most well-known sets of rules in Leviticus revolves around what the Israelites could and could not eat. God instructs the people to avoid certain animals, labeling them as unclean. Animals that chew the cud and have divided hooves, like cows and sheep, were permitted, while others, like pigs, were forbidden. These laws seem puzzling to modern minds, but they served multiple purposes. On a practical level, these dietary restrictions could have helped protect the Israelites from foodborne illnesses common at the time. Spiritually, these laws separated the Israelites from other nations, serving as a daily reminder of their distinct covenant with God. The concept of clean and unclean extended beyond food, representing spiritual purity and devotion to God. 2. Clothing Laws, Leviticus 19:19 and Leviticus 19:19, God commands the Israelites, do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. This law, like many others, has sparked curiosity over the years. Why would mixing fabrics, such as wool and linen, be prohibited? One interpretation is that this law reflects the broader biblical theme of separation, a concept deeply ingrained in the Levitical code. Just as the Israelites were called to be separate from other nations, they were also instructed to avoid mixing certain things. Some scholars suggest that avoiding mixed fabrics symbolized purity and completeness. Others propose that this law was intended to prevent the blending of holy and common items, preserving the sanctity of sacred garments worn by priests. 3. The Law of Mixed Fields, Leviticus 19:19. In the same verse about clothing, Leviticus also forbids sowing your field with two kinds of seeds. While this might seem like an odd regulation, it ties into the ancient Hebrew principle of keeping things distinct and not mixing what was intended to be separate. In an agricultural society, this law could have served practical purposes. By keeping crops separate, farmers could ensure more efficient and effective harvesting. Spiritually, it represented the purity of Israel's relationship with God. There should be no compromise, mixture, or blending of values. 4. Prohibition against tattoos, Leviticus 19:28. Leviticus 19:28 instructs the Israelites, do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourselves. Today, tattoos are widespread and commonly seen as a form of self-expression. However, in ancient times, tattoos were often associated with pagan rituals and the worship of foreign gods. By forbidding tattoos, God was calling his people to stand apart from neighboring nations that engaged in practices such as cutting or marking their bodies in mourning rituals. This law was part of a broader prohibition against idolatry and foreign religious customs, protecting Israel from adopting the beliefs and practices of other cultures that could lead them astray. 5. The Law of Bodily Discharges, Leviticus 15. One of the more peculiar and intimate sections of Leviticus deals with bodily discharges, whether from illness, menstruation, or sexual activity. Leviticus 15 goes into detail about how people were to handle these situations, and they were often labeled unclean for a period of time afterward. To the modern reader, this might seem unnecessarily strict or uncomfortable to discuss. But in the ancient world, these laws had both a practical and symbolic function. Practically, they encouraged hygiene and prevented the spread of disease in a time when medical knowledge was limited. Symbolically, bodily discharges represented impurity or imperfection, which stood in contrast to God's holiness. By following these laws, the Israelites could restore their cleanliness and be fit to worship in the temple. 6. The Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16. One of the central themes of Leviticus is the idea of atonement, restoring the relationship between God and his people when it had been broken by sin. The Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, was the most sacred day in the Israelite calendar, a day when the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies in the temple to offer sacrifices for the sins of the entire nation. This ritual involved the strange but powerful practice of the scapegoat. 2 goats were chosen, one was sacrificed, and the other was symbolically loaded with the sins of the people and sent into the wilderness, carrying their transgressions away. This act of removing sin from the community was both a physical and spiritual cleansing, symbolizing God's forgiveness and the people's renewed relationship with him. 7. No crossbreeding of animals, Leviticus 19:19. In the same verse that deals with mixed fabrics and fields, God also instructs the Israelites not to make two different kinds of animals. While this law may seem out of place, it aligns with the broader theme of separation and order. In the biblical worldview, everything was created with a specific purpose and design. By forbidding the crossbreeding of animals, God was reinforcing the idea that his creation should remain as he intended, without human interference. Additionally, this law may have had a practical side, ensuring the purity and sustainability of livestock. 8. Rules for priests. Leviticus 21. Leviticus lays out strict rules for priests, who were responsible for maintaining the spiritual health of the community. These rules included regulations on marriage, physical appearance, and contact with the dead. For example, priests were forbidden to marry divorced women or widows, and they could not come into contact with a dead body unless it was a close relative. While these rules might seem excessive, they highlighted the sacred role of the priesthood and the importance of remaining ritually pure. The priests were intermediaries between God and the people, and their purity was crucial for their role in the temple. 9. The Jubilee Year. Leviticus 25. One of the most fascinating laws in Leviticus is the concept of the Jubilee Year, which occurred every 50 years. During this year, all debts were forgiven, slaves were freed, and land was returned to its original owners. This law ensured that wealth and power would not become overly concentrated in the hands of a few, and that the people of Israel would be reminded of their dependence on God, not material possessions. The Jubilee Year was a radical concept, promoting social justice and economic equality in a way that was unheard of in the ancient world. 10. No mixing wool and linen. Leviticus 19:19. Another seemingly strange law is the prohibition against wearing garments made of both wool and linen. Like the laws about mixed seeds and animals, this one emphasized the importance of keeping things distinct. Some scholars believe that this law was designed to prevent Israelites from adopting the practices of pagan priests, who may have worn mixed fabrics in their religious ceremonies. Others see it as a broader symbol of purity and order, reflecting the holiness that God desired from his people. 11. Sacrifices for unintentional sins. Leviticus 4. One of the key features of Leviticus is the sacrificial system, which provided a way for the Israelites to atone for their sins. Interestingly, Leviticus makes a distinction between intentional and unintentional sins. When someone sinned unintentionally, whether through ignorance or accident, they were still required to bring a sacrifice to the temple. This law highlights the seriousness of sin in the biblical worldview. Even unintentional wrongdoing had consequences, and the sacrificial system provided a way for the people to make things right with God. 12. The law of leprosy. Leviticus 13-14. Leviticus devotes 2 full chapters to the diagnosis and treatment of leprosy, which was a highly feared disease in the ancient world. These laws required the priests to examine individuals suspected of having leprosy and determine whether they were clean or unclean. Those diagnosed with leprosy were isolated from the community to prevent the spread of disease. If the leprosy healed, the individual underwent a purification ritual before being allowed to return. While these laws may seem harsh, they reflected deep concern for public health and community well-being in a time when there were few medical treatments available. The laws of Leviticus, though strange to modern readers, served as the foundation for Israel's relationship with God. These commandments touched every aspect of life: what to eat, what to wear, how to worship, and how to live in community. More than just a list of rules, Leviticus called the Israelites to live holy lives, set apart from the surrounding nations. It was a blueprint for a society built on justice, purity, and devotion to God. Through these laws, the Israelites were constantly reminded of their covenant with God, their unique identity as his chosen people, and the holiness required to maintain that relationship.